Getting ready to start the microengineering tall steel viaduct kit. What I have laid out here is one 150-foot kit. Now this piece of paper here with the lines on it, that is the length I need to make the bridge. Now the one kit falls just a little bit short, so I may have to get into this box here for some additional parts. Well, I'm getting ready to glue together a tower span. So what I'll do now is attach this side to these pieces, and then this section will be finished. I have one of the tower spans glued together, so we'll let that sit up for a little bit before I take the square away. Now this 50-foot girder span was not part of this kit. It was part of another kit that I got from eBay, and it ended up, it was that box, but it was just a pile of leftover parts, so I guess you just never know what you're going to get. Anyway, some of the parts have a lot of flash, and there's a lot of sanding required. So I've been using a 100 grit sanding stick and then finishing up with the 320. Some of the parts do require quite a bit of sanding. I'm having to make do with what I have for this 50-foot span. I don't have the correct parts to put this section of the bridge together, so I'm just using what I have. And I figure that once it's assembled, it won't really matter as long as the spacing's correct. And I had to cut the end, trim the end off to fit here, to fit this curve. So I'll get this put together and I'll see how it fits. I have 3 spans glued together, and it's upside down right now. Go like that. You see the 50-foot center span is deeper than the 30-foot outer spans. If I align it on my guide here, and you notice how the sections line up with my template. Well, I have the main span of the bridge finished. All right, time to get some paint on this bridge span. It's a little bit breezy today, so I'm painting underneath the covered patio. Well, I have the bridge shoes glued on. So now I'm going to take the bridge span here and go out to the layout and see if I can start to fit it in place. Well, it looks like the bridge section fits pretty well. It lines up with the track. I'm going to use these Monroe model abutments. Well, here are the Monroe model's abutments. Now on the bridge length, I left it a little bit short on the ends to make room for the abutment. So I'll just have to cut this section of foam risers out and just start fitting it and see how it all fits. I set the abutments in place using the temporary track I had spanning this area and a piece of the risers to set the height. Now I believe I've cut the abutments so that the bridge span, the top of the span, is even with the abutment. And that would mean that when I lay the bridge track on the bridge span, it should be at the same height as the abutment. Same is true for this side. The track lays right on top of the abutment. So what I'll do now is I'll remove the temporary track. I'll remove this piece here and then fit the bridge span in place. Ironically, there was just a couple spots in the backdrop where I didn't sand out the spackle, and right here there's a seam. You can see the screws there if you look closely. And it just so happens to be I'm going to have a canyon right in that spot, so I'm going to have to sand it out anyway. And I should have just sanded it out all those months ago, but I'll have to do it now. I have the bridge track cut for length. Of course, I'll have to add the ends. But for now, what I need to do first is figure out how to bend this bridge track to fit the bridge span. So I need to cut this bridge track in spots so I can bend it to match the curvature of the bridge. Now what I'm going to need to do, well, is I have to cut this outer timber, I don't know what it's called, a slot, and then cut the plastic here and here where the plastic is on the outer rail. That way I'll be able to bend the track. Now the big question is, how often do I cut it? I don't want to just put a bunch of cuts in it and then have gaps in this outer timber. So do I cut it, every three ties? Do I cut it every 4 ties? I don't know. What I might do is take this piece of bridge track that's left over and experiment with it. All right, well, I've cut this piece of track every 4 ties. Here, 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 here. And then on the bottom, I've also cut, you can see here and here, 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 here. Now that allowed me to bend the track. You see there's not a lot of curve in it, but over a 20-inch length, I don't need it to curve very sharply. So I think that's going to be enough. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my actual track, cut it every 4 ties, and then curve it to fit the shape of the bridge span. Well, the bridge track is now arched to match the shape of the bridge span, and it matches it almost perfectly. Okay, well, I got the ends on the bridge track. And you can see how well the curve of the bridge track matches the span of the bridge. Going to solder on the bridge track ends now. Once that's done, I'll put the bridge track up in place, mark everything out to cut the existing track in order to fit the bridge track. There's 4 joiners on each side. I'll go ahead and solder all 4 on each side. Now that the bridge track is soldered, the ends are soldered on, the curvature is set. And as I said previously, you can see it matches the bridge span pretty well. I have the track marked out, and now I can go ahead and cut this track here, and I can cut this track right here. Then I'll be able to fit the bridge track in place. The bridge track is fit, so that's done. So what I'll probably do now is put some ties in place, and that way I can prime the track. Little test run. All right. The bridges are at 0 elevation. There's no grade on the bridges. Now there's a grade here that goes down, then it hits the bridge, goes flat, the grade goes down, flat, goes down. I have the bridge span in place. Everything fits pretty well. So I think the next thing I'm going to do with the layout is start working on the terrain. I'll remove the track and the bridge and get started on that. Well, I'm going to glue these ties in place here. I'm going to use some Formula 560. I'll just dip a micro brush in the glue. Could use CA, but CA can be brittle. And this will give me a little more of a flexible joint. I'll go ahead and weigh that down. And once this Formula 560 goes clear, then it's set up and these ties will be stuck in place for good. I now have the bridge track primered, and so I'm ready to install it in the layout. I have these two bent halves removed from the sprue. This one's broken. It's not a real big deal, but these are flimsy. They are very thin. And so once they build up, I'm sure they'll be more rigid, but it's not going to be a super strong structure. At least I don't think so. So we'll see how they all come together. Looks like there are going to be quite a few parts involved in building these. I'm gluing the bent halves together. And right now I just have the top and the second rung down glued. Because as you can see, they go out of alignment, and so as I work it down, I'm going to have to push the bent half around to get everything to line up. And I have this heavy steel ruler going across the bottom spans to try to hold it flat, because these pieces are thin and they're very flimsy. So I'm using this ruler to try to flatten it out. And once these top two rungs have set up, I have them glued now. I'll probably give it a good half an hour. And then I'll work my way down to this one and then down to this one. Because obviously it's very flimsy and I could pull them up to put glue underneath. So that's my plan. I have the frames for the bents put together. They're still pretty flimsy. I'm going to get some reinforcement here pretty soon. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is put in this X bracing and rivet plates. So I'll find those pieces in my stacks of styrene, start cutting those parts out. Well, I have the X bracing and the webbing installed on my bents. And I also cut off the lower section because I don't need that much height. It'd be nice to have a real tall, towers and a real tall viaduct, but my layout is not like that. So this is 7 inches, and even at 7 inches, they're going to be too tall. So I'm going to have to trim these legs, and that's why I didn't put any X bracing in this lower section. I don't know where I'm going to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is start building these into 2 towers. I have these tower struts assembled, and they're assembled from 4 individual pieces. And those are going to be used to build the bent halves into a tower assembly. I'm going to deviate from the instructions on how I do this. Most likely, the lower half of these bents are going to be cut off, because this bent is about almost 7 inches long, and my track height is only 6.5 inches long. Plus, I'm going to have some groundwork in place, so these could be trimmed anywhere. Well, who knows? But they won't be this long. So I'm not going to put any X bracing in here. I'll just put the tower struts in here, and I'll put one in up here that the instructions don't call for. I'm now gluing the tower struts in place, gluing the bent halves together to create the tower structure. Well, now that I have the tower struts installed, I'm going to install the X bracing right here. All right, well, the towers are built, with the exception of an I-beam that goes up on top here. But I'm going to wait to put those on until after I get everything fitted in the layout. I have a tremendous mess. My modeling table is absolutely trashed. I have the bridge and the tower set in place, and you can see it's obviously too tall, so I'm going to have to trim down the towers. Bought these Woodland Scenics rock molds probably 7 years ago. I'm just now getting around to using them. So I have some hydrocal plaster poured into these molds. I'll let this plaster set up for a while and pull them out. I've already started with doing a couple molds as a test. Now I'm in full production. Well, my castings have been in the molds pretty much all day. I don't know how long they're supposed to be in the molds, but I had an appointment during the afternoon, and then I took a nap. So trying to get them out of the molds now. Now I did use some diluted dish soap in these molds. So I poured diluted dish soap in the molds and then poured it out, but there's a small layer of soap in these molds. And the casting came out really easy. So I guess I use the soap as a release agent, and it seems to work okay. You can see this rock casting. Looks pretty good. These plaster rock castings all turned out pretty nice. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm certainly going to need a lot of these for the layout. So I'll wash the molds, get everything ready. I'll probably cast some more tomorrow. Well, I put in the roadbed for my abandoned track. So I'm going to have a piece of abandoned track here. And I'll lay some flex track down here. And then probably clip the rails off about right here. Still have the ties, but just have the rails here to the backdrop. And I'm thinking if I can set up my terrain so that the towers won't reflect, I might want to put a mirror on the backdrop, as long as I can set it up where the towers don't reflect in the mirror. I'm laying in the terrain for this canyon. I've utilized quite a few of these plaster rock molds. Now I'm filling in the area behind with pink foam, and then I'll put some plaster cloth on top of that. So now I'll work on this area, put some pink foam in there. I have the foam cut, and I'm filling in behind the plaster rock castings. So I guess the next step would be to wad up some paper and start putting down some plaster cloth. I have the initial terrain done in the canyon here where my bridge is going to go. I have the plaster rock castings in place, and then I put the plaster cloth in. And I also redid this. So what I'll do now is I'm going to let this plaster cloth dry for probably a day. And then I'll start trimming the bridge towers to fit the terrain. My micro-engineering tall steel viaduct is in place. Of course, it's not very tall. I cut 2/3 of the tower height away, but that's just what I had to do to get it to fit in my scene. I don't know why it's called a viaduct and why it's not called a deck girder bridge. But that's neither here nor there. It's built and it's in place. Everything's fit. It's not permanently installed because I have to do scenic work in here. But I do have it running. I also did some rock work in the area and used those Woodland Scenics rock molds. So I can see myself doing a whole lot more of that in the near future. It's my Walthers Proto SD9. I have the sound turned off. So overall, I'm pleased with it. I think it looks pretty good. I'm thinking I wish I had some backdrops, some scenic backdrops. That's something I might think about over the summer. I have my abandoned track in place. See where the ties are pulled up here. I think that's going to give me an opportunity to do some interesting scenic work down in this canyon area here. So, I think that's all for this one. I thank you for watching. I hope you join me next time.